All right, excellent. Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give everyone just about a minute to join, and then we'll get started. All right, so hi, everyone. My name is Alexandra Delazio. I'll be the moderator for today's session. So welcome to the 37th Annual International Seating Symposium. So our speaker today is Claudia Amortegui, and she'll be speaking about codes, coverage, products, and innovation. And do these words work together? So something that we're all probably really excited to hear about. So without further ado, you are in session IC 02. So if you're not supposed to be here, you're in session IC 02. So without further ado, I'll give it away to Claudia.
Thanks, Alex. Hi, everybody. I was just sitting here glancing through all the names of who's on board, and it is nice to see a lot of the names. I miss a lot of people. I wish we were out having a cocktail afterwards, but it is what it is. So I'm in Colorado where it's sunny. I think I know some of you guys are out in the Northeast where it's freezing, so keep warm. But with that said, because we've got some limited time, I was just talking to a couple of us were just talking, saying this is a topic that I think we can talk for hours on when it comes to codes, coverage, products, and innovation. And do all these words really work together? And this is becoming a hotter topic as time goes. And it quite honestly should have been a hot topic, in my opinion, for a long time. But for those of you that don't know me, I guess I'll do a quick introduction. I've been in the industry for way too many years. Admittedly, it's just about 30. It'll be 30 this year. I started with Medicare of all things. Then I went on to Quickie, learned the manufacturer side. I went and worked for a national provider on the supply side. So I learned the provider side. And then I'd been consulting for many, many years, working with manufacturers, providers, referrals. I even work with some of the funding sources themselves, and actually now have even not only doing consulting, but also working on another side of the healthcare industry as well. So a little bit all over the place, but have felt the pain of many and see also what's going on. So hopefully going to try to tie some of these things together, have a conversation about it. You've got the chat there to ask questions. I'll try to answer them as we go. If we start getting a little too sideways, I'll pull us back. We'll leave some time too at the end, but feel free, those of you who have been through my presentations before, I rather you guys ask questions as we go, because you normally bring up some great points. And like I said, I know there's a lot to say on this whole topic, and we'll cover as much as we can. But with that said, some of the things we're going to cover, sort of the past, present, and future. And what I mean with that is everything when it comes to codes, products, and their definitions. Sort of the insurance part of it. I've always been known as the person who talks about Medicare. That's still the foundation for everything, but obviously that then creeps into the Medicaids, into the commercial plans, everything there. So we've got to look at everybody as a whole. Policies and denials, quote unquote upgrades, and then sort of meaning what can you do? What's your role in everything? What can we all look at from that side? So the past, the present, and the future. Past, HCPCS codes, that's where it all starts. When we look at just our CRT industry itself, many of these codes were developed in 1993, so they are old. I say that was right, in essence, when I started in the industry, a little bit after. Some were even developed before that, but a bulk of our codes were developed in the 90s. We had some in 2004, and then we had the newer codes, so to speak, that we all call them, were the power wheelchair codes, and those were in 2006. But if you think about it, It's been over 15 years at this point in time. It was actually the end of 2006, so it's been right at 15 years. So if we think about what innovations has happened in 15 years, I mean, if you think of just our cell phones, so we look at wheelchairs, but we're stuck with these old codes, and that's one of our biggest problems. Then we've got policies. Well, the policies were written for a lot of these items when the codes were developed, if there was even a policy. So just as old as the codes are is just as old as the policies are. They may have tweaked little things here and there, but not too much. Then we've got the mindset. The mindset from everybody is the fact that everybody just sort of has been relying on those old policies and HCPCS codes kind of because we've been forced to. It's not saying it's anybody's fault, but the insurers have sat there. The internal provider staff, I've even worked with people that, you know, have great knowledge, but they're remembering policy that started back in the 90s or back in the early 2000s. And then even some clinicians, because same thing. Some of us have been doing this for a long time. Some people have been writing letters for a long time. So some things have changed, but we get stuck in our sort of the same place. So we've all stayed in the past. Part of our problem, again, we've been sort of forced to do that because of the policies. But I also think that's been kind of our crutch because we don't speak up because we've all said, well, it's been that way. So that's the way we have to do it. But to me, part of it is getting our voices out there and getting out of the mindset that we're currently in. So if we look at just an example of HCPCS codes, for some of you guys that may remember way back when, I want to say it was around in 2006, I may be off by a couple of years, maybe it was 2009, but we used to have the K9 code. It was a manual wheelchair code that was considered other manual wheelchairs. They decided, nope, we don't want that code. To be fair, it was because, or not to be fair, to be honest, it was because of, they didn't admit to this, but they're harder to process. Every K9 code claim had to stop because it could be a lot of different things. So they had to stop it, review it, price it individually, and look at each one of those individually. That takes time. Time means money in their front. So they took all the products that were in K9 and they put them into either K5, E1161, and then K6. So K5 was the ultra lightweight, E1161 was is a manual tilt and space, and K6 is a heavy duty manual wheelchair, just a standard big old heavy duty wheelchair. And actually, as I think about it, some may have even gone into a transport wheelchair code. That's where they all fell. The reason why they were in that K9 is because at the time when they first applied for a code, they didn't fit in any one of those code definitions. Now, magically, they do. One of the things they did, they changed the definition for the E1161. They changed the degrees as to where or how much a chair had to tilt. So they actually made it less. So here they forced something into a code, even though it really didn't make sense with the policy that was around that individual code. And then there was, you know, to me, probably one of the biggest detriments. Some people, if they're old Quickie people, they remember there was a Quickie M6 that's still out there, I believe. I called it the Quickie 2 for heavy, or the heavy duty Quickie 2 chair, because it held up to 600 pounds, or it holds up to 600 pounds. It had an adjustable axle. It did a lot of things that there was no other bariatric chairs that could do that. And they developed that. And that's why they got originally the K9 code. Well, now it got shoved in the standard sort of non-adjustable, big old heavy duty type of chair that didn't do anything. And unfortunately, the allowable reflects that. So what did we do, or what did they do? Actually, not me. What they ended up doing, the insurance companies ended up limiting the ability for end users who needed that chair to be able to get that chair. The most famous hit, or the biggest hit that took place, was the titanium chairs. They were K9s, they all went into K5s. So, you know, it was not an issue, and we'll talk about it more of, is it covered? It was just more the allowable is not going to cover it. So now, again, we're limiting the ability for patients to be able to get that chair. So that was one example of what happened with codes. The effects were policies, allowables, and innovation. Innovation meaning people who are going, hey, maybe I can go into this other code, meaning other manual wheelchairs. Maybe I can fall into that because it doesn't fit these other criteria. Well, everybody stops because I say, hey, I can't develop a new chair for these allowables, or I can't do certain things because of these allowables or these code restrictions. So unfortunately, something like that ends up affecting what innovation happens. And yeah, somebody just commented, I have had several clients that would have greatly benefited from an M6, but it was too far above the allowable, or too far, you weren't going to get enough money, which is true. And that's the part, again, where we start talking about, we've got to get word out there. And that's going to come. I can't tell who's a clinician, who's not from who's chatting, but this is where we're going to have to get the clinicians really speaking up. And we'll talk about more of that in a little bit. KO108, it's the infamous miscellaneous code. I see it used in a lot of different things. Some people will say, oh, just put a KO108, even though it has a code. There's a gel arm pad, make it a KO108, or there's a tray, make it a KO108, because the allowables aren't good enough. One, the insurers are smarter than that in most cases. You have a couple of Medicaids or maybe even a commercial that'll allow you to do that. My only flag that I would say would be just make sure that it's okay to do that, because all the insurers are supposed to be following the HCPCS codes and the definitions of those HCPCS codes. So if you were ever to be audited, you don't ever want to get in trouble if you're a provider. Clinicians, make sure you just realize that's sort of the hiccup that the providers go through. But in the same breath, you do have some insurers, thankfully, that say, you know what, we understand it's different. You can go on and use that miscellaneous code. So people just need to make sure, this is where asking questions, making the calls to the insurers and finding out on that one. This shouldn't be just a dump code. Hey, the dollars aren't enough, so I'm just going to use KO108. That's going to get people in trouble down the road. So how does this help with innovation? Is it good or is it bad? We've got, there's no policy to KO108. I can see that both ways. It's good because maybe they'll look at it individually. It's bad because there's no policy. And if they're lazy, so to speak, or don't have the expertise or don't have the time or whatever it happens to be, then they might just check the box and say, well, we're not going to cover it. There's no allowables, same thing. It's good because hopefully they're going to look at the reality of the invoices and what's it going to really mean. It's also bad because we don't know where we're going to end up. So that's where this KO108 has pros and cons. But it's where we could end up getting stuck on things. So in the present, pretty much the same thing. We're still stuck in the past for most everything because everybody keeps looking backwards and looking at what we've always had to deal with. I hate to say it. Those of you who've known me, I've always been pretty brutally honest, but it's one of those that people are getting lazy. People want the same thing, quick, easy, fast. We want to make sure end users get product as quickly as possible. But in the same breath, that can't be our reason as to why we don't end up taking the time to fight for certain things. So one of our newest codes, ironically, is about to hit 6 years old. It's the E1012. It was the power center mount leg rests that was developed in 2016. Well, here, great, we got a new code and they just gave us the allowable for the standard individual elevating power leg rests. So, great, we got a new code, but it didn't really do much, for some things. To be fair, also talking with manufacturers and stuff, did the allowable really need to be much higher or was it really a similar type product? So that's a conversation to be had on a whole different call. E2300 seat elevators, obviously we're still stuck. They're not covered. The industry is fighting for those. It's been a long fight. I can step aside and look from the insurer side and their fear of going, okay, is this going to just blow up and get out of hand? How do we make sure we do this right? So they've got to look at it from their point. And then even the KO108 code, we're still stuck sort of looking at everything. Years ago, a lot of years ago, one of the medical directors had actually looked at developing new codes for all the different CRT seating and positioning items and other products out there. There was a whole group. I was involved. I know several people on this phone call or on this in this meeting were involved, that we were actually going to try and hopefully have new CRT codes developed. And then unfortunately that medical director went away and then the whole idea went away. So back to, we're still stuck in the past, just like we have been for many years. The future becomes us screaming a bit louder. To me, until we break this cycle, the future is going to be tough for innovation of any type. Because if we just all keep saying, well, there's not a code, well, the allowable is not good enough, it's too hard to get funded, No, we got to make sure the orders are quick and easy. We need to make sure we don't do anything new because we don't want to upset anybody, whatever it happens to be. And quite honestly, even, our margin has to be X, all of that stuff ties in. If we don't stop and break that cycle, we're not going to have great innovation for our CRT industry. If anybody heard the keynote earlier, Barry Dean was saying, it's the cars have more innovation than what we have for CRT. I understand the car industry is much larger, but in the same breath, we should have the ability to provide the end users with similar innovation that everybody else is having as well. We just can't be accepting in any way, whether it's the supplier, the ATP, or their management, clinician, reimbursement. There's a case study a quick little quote unquote case study that we'll talk about at the end. Listening to a beneficiary appeal and talk to the insurer on a phone call just the other week and hearing him say, this isn't just for me, this is for all wheelchair users. And he's saying, yes, I will fight this till the end. So, off to the next step we go. And we need to use our voices loudly. Suppliers is great, but to me, clinicians, both the PTs, the OTs, and then if we can get any doctors involved, that's going to be the big one. Because what I hear from insurers is, well, we don't hear much. People aren't saying too much. It's pretty quiet, whatever. They just see it as it must be okay. So that's where we have to get loud on that front. And it's going to take time, which I know we're all short of, but somehow we're going to have to sneak some time out to be able to do this, or we're going to stay in the past. So as we jump from that, we can, people will say, well, can we just use upgrades? Can we just use upgrades for this? Why don't you just upgrade that? Hey, patient, you can pick this, but it's just an upgrade. Can we just do an upgrade? Go from the smaller fishbowl up into the bigger one. Well, the thing is, the terminology that everybody uses is not the same, even though a lot of people tend to try to use it in the same way. So in my world, there's 3 different terms I see. It's upgrades, upcharges, and then there's non-covered items. These are not all the same. They're different, but people tend to use the words in the wrong way. So for upgrades, for Medicare, an upgrade from one HCPCS code to another, that's what an upgrade is. It's not within the same code. It's from one upgrade. It's from one code to another. So for power wheelchairs, a K0856 to a K0861. So you can go anything from a single power option to a multi-power option, or even from a group 2 to a group 3 power wheelchair. From manual wheelchairs, those are a little bit more difficult because we have to look at, if they're considered rentals versus purchases. You currently cannot upgrade within the same code. For those of you who've heard me for years, this one angers me because when upgrades were first developed, when that language was first pulled in under Medicare, that was part of the whole reason, was to be able to upgrade within the same code. And years later, and I hate to say it, part of it stemmed from some wrong education and some certain meetings that went on, that somebody had, educated people erroneously, and the wrong people were in the room. So suddenly you can't upgrade within the same code, which shouldn't have happened. You cannot upgrade items that are even considered nicer or better, such as wheels, tires, and hand rims. To me, that ends up being a bit of a problem. I just lost my cursor. But that's what I see there because, again, what's an upgrade? I want something a little nicer. I should be able to pay for it. Valid upgrades will require an ABN that end users will be able to have. That'll give them the option to make sure, yes, this is what I want. I'm willing to pay the difference. That's okay with me. But again, the big part here is upgrades do not include items that they can go from the same code to the same code. An upcharge, my definition of upcharge, because it's really what it comes down to, is it's a charge by the manufacturer for an item that is normally considered a standard option or part of a wheelchair. Again, in the Medicare world, a good example of this becomes on a manual wheelchair, the Spinergy wheels, or the Schwalbe tires, or gel arm pads, anything like that. because wheels, arm pads are all considered part of the wheelchair, but hey, we can get something that's a little nicer. I'm going to answer the free upgrade here in just a quick minute. I'm going to do one more definition and we'll get over there. With upcharges, we just talked about some of those for items that cannot be considered an upgrade, such as titanium is going to be another one because it's the frame of the chair. Titanium chairs are all now considered a K5. The K5 is a K5 is a K5. An ABN is not necessarily used during an upgrade, but it's not a bad idea to give a beneficiary just a heads up and upfront notice of it. But it also can force a provider to file an entire claim as non-assigned. What does that mean? It means that they are going to have to collect full payment up front, which, as we all know, is not the most feasible for a lot of these patients, and it cannot be done for all patients. So if they have Medicaid, it cannot be done. For all the providers that have contracts with commercial payers, in most cases, if not all, those contracts read they have to accept assignment. Again, non-assignment means payment up front from the patient. Assigned means the check's going to actually go from the insurer to the provider. So everybody has to be careful about that. Thank you, Allison, for answering ABN, Advanced Beneficiary Notice. My fault on that one. So that's what we're looking at with upcharges. Non-covered items, under Medicare's definition, is when an item does not meet the statutory definition of a benefit category, or when it doesn't meet other requirements specified in regulations, or when an item is statutorily excluded from coverage for reasons other than medical necessity. So that's going to be non-covered. Seat elevators, power standards, group 4 power wheelchairs. Those are your higher end power wheelchairs. Even treadmills is on that list. For Medicare, it's equipment needed only for outside use, outside of the home. But we always need to remember Medicaid must consider the community. That's part of their deal, so to speak. They are supposed to look at the whole thing. So we need to be careful with the use of words, which we'll go into. I want to look at these questions really quick. How about when the vendor is offering a free upgrade? So a couple things with that, which is a really great question. The vendors technically can offer a free upgrade. That's not a problem at all. I see that more on manual wheelchairs, some of more of the lightweight manual wheelchairs. No matter what it happens to be, though, clinicians, please be aware, make sure the patients are aware as well, that even if they do a free upgrade, that when it comes to repairs, if it's an extra more of an option, not for the whole chair, that patient's going to be responsible for the repairs. So seat elevators, even though they're considered non-covered, wouldn't necessarily be seen as an upgrade. Somebody might say, hey, we're just going to quote unquote throw that in. Just they're going to have to understand that when that seat elevator breaks, they're going to be responsible for the repairs. So I always want to make sure patients are going in with eyes wide open and there's no surprises. So that's what they need to know. So free upgrades are allowed. But again, there could be more than just that one item. And we also have to look at the whole repair side of things. What is considered a valid upgrade? Anyone have an example? A valid upgrade can be from a K3 manual wheelchair to a K4 manual wheelchair. It could be from a single power option power wheelchair just for a power tilt, but they're going to end up getting a multi-power option wheelchair, a power tilt and recline. So those are some valid quote unquote upgrades because that's going from one code to the next code. And then we got that. Why is titanium a non-covered item and is the same code as its aluminum counterpart? Is this because it's material, but the wheelchair has a code? So this question regards to titanium is considered covered. It's a K5. K5s are covered. So this actually goes right into this. We want to be careful with the use of words. If we think about it, titanium wheelchairs are covered as a K5. K5s are considered covered manual wheelchairs. Titanium wheelchairs cannot be considered upgrades under Medicare because they are coded as a K5 wheelchair. They are also a K5, so we can't upgrade from one code to the next. And then in order to collect additional payment on titanium wheelchairs, For the most part, they can really only be provided as a non-assigned claim, meaning the patient would have to pay for the full thing up front. And then at the end, they'll only be paying the difference because they should, as long as they qualified for the K5, they'll get the check for the remainder of the K5, for the bulk of the K5. So they'll end up out of pocket for the difference. The hard part is coming up with it up front. The other hard part is, like what we talked about, is the whole fact that for Medicaid, you couldn't do that. For a lot of the commercial plans, the providers can't do that either because of this whole assignment thing. So it's really comes down to a code thing and not an allowable thing. So the allowable has, when the insurances look at it, they don't look at it as allowable, they look at it as codes. So that's the problem we get into. The allowable, just like you say on this chat, the allowable is too low for most people to provide that titanium wheelchair, or for anybody to provide that titanium wheelchair as just a standard K5. So they are covered, just the monies don't meet everybody's needs when it comes to that. We're going to get into the hand rooms in just a second for that next question as well. So titanium wheelchairs are upcharges. We just talked about all of this, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but the upcharge can't be separately coded. That's the biggest thing I want to make sure people understand. I know people have asked me and said, hey, with carbon fiber, with titanium, because they're in the same boat, can we just do an upcharge for that line item for doing either titanium or carbon fiber? The answer is no, because the provider can get dinged big time because they're going to say they're unbundling a code. Those are considered K5s. You're not supposed to unbundle it. You have to keep it all together. So that's what we look at there. And yes, Christy, that's why we wanted to make sure. So carbon fiber and titanium, same things in this situation. So this holds true for all the other upcharges as well. Gel arm pads, what we talked about earlier, gel arm pads, they're considered an arm pad. And in the coding world, an arm pad's an arm pad's an arm pad. I'm not saying that that's the case. That's what the coding world is saying. So it's considered with the initial issue of any wheelchair. So, you know, we should not be charging clients for those. But in the same breath, clinicians, I will say this, realize that the manufacturers are having to, the providers are having to pay for the manufacturers for this. I don't blame the manufacturers either, because the manufacturers are obviously having to make something that's at a higher level that's going to cost them more money. So it's this vicious cycle. But again, nobody's screaming. Gel arm pads are going out. Things are happening. So things stay the same, back to staying in the past. Trays or upper extremity supports. Years ago, people said, hey, we're going to call them upper extremity supports. We'll code them as KO108. They know what it is. It's a tray. Unfortunately, trays are coded as EO950s. That includes even the hardware. We can't separately bill for it. The allowable is absolutely atrocious. This code is back from the early 90s. Nothing's changed since then. And that's part of the argument of saying we need new codes. So we can't just use a KO108. Again, some of your commercial payers, providers, if you get permission, and I would get permission, then you would want to make sure that that's okay. But that's something that we look at. It's in their world, a tray is a tray is a tray, even if you want to call it an upper extremity support. Seat elevators, we know they're considered just statutorily non-covered. Again, the industry has been doing a great job. NCART's been very much leading that front along with others within the CRT industry. So that fight is still on. Again, understanding the insurer's side, they need to make sure that this is done appropriately. I always say the people sitting on these calls aren't the ones doing the things that are messing things up. It's the people sort of on the outside world, but we all realize they're out there. So it's just making sure everything happens correctly. So hopefully this will change at some point soon. We don't officially need an ABN for this, but again, we want to make sure the end users know they're going to be responsible for any repairs, any damages, things like that, because it's considered non-covered, whether they paid for the seat elevator up front or whether it was given to them for free or for a very low cost. Some insurances are paying for seat elevator in New York State, which is great. And I know some insurances, some commercial payers are as well. So remember, this is the foundation for Medicare. I'm glad you brought that up, Susan, on that front. There are some that have paid for it and some that we've even been able to appeal through initial denials and fight for it on that front. So that's back to being able to speak up and talk about it. And that's even with the Medicaids, because they have to look at the community. Some of them have also been paying for it. So when I say that, make sure you realize that as an overall is just Medicare. We will have some other insurers that will pick up for it and pay for it. Now, some tires are up charges. Tires, wheels, hand rims. Somebody was asking about hand rims earlier. The tires themselves for manual wheelchairs, Medicare, and then even the coding definitions, which should be all other insurers, will include solid tires to be the standard tire on any manual wheelchair, including K5s. But if they're doing any type of pneumatic, then they would be able to look at doing a pneumatic tire with either a tube or flat free. The allowable is not great, but at least it's something. Sometimes just because of the dollars themselves, they can't do it. Something that people can look at is possibly looking at sort of what we call a second set. So somebody wants us, specialty wheels and hand rims. They're covered. They're just not separate. They're saying, hey, they should get, whatever it is they need. Again, the dollars don't make sense. So the best way to look at doing that is they can get the standard no charge tires, wheels, and hand rims on their manual wheelchair. But then they can also choose to, on their own, purchase a second set of wheels, hand rims, and tires. And that's something then they can sort of pick and choose how they want to customize that. But then that would become their one out-of-pocket item. So that's what we would look at on that front. Real quick before I get into that slide, somebody's asked, are they responsible for repairs only on the part that they got as a free upgrade, or are they responsible for any repairs on the wheelchair that is an upgrade regardless? They would be just responsible for the part that's not covered. And then if that part requires anything more in the wheelchair, but not the wheelchair itself. So just sort of really the whole item that's not that's non-covered, that's what they're going to be responsible for. Now, for those, I briefly talked about this. If non-assigned is not an option, so they can't pay for the full wheelchair up front for, if they want certain options. For some items, like we said, they can look at that whole second set. But obviously, if we're talking titanium and carbon fiber, I can't get a second set of the titanium or carbon fiber wheelchair frame. So, and some of those things were a little stuck. But we do have some options to look at in some cases. So can I bill or can I code any of the upcharge items? No, because if they're included in a product already, we can't separately code those. So those are the arm pads, wheel locks. Even if it's nicer or better, just like you guys saw the definition earlier, they can't bill for those separately. They have to be able to include those as part of the wheelchair base. Again, we do have some Medicaids and private insurers that might, but most of them are following the HCPCS coding rules. So it becomes a little bit more difficult. And we can't also just throw it into the K108 code. So sometimes whether it's ATPs might think, hey, our billing team will just put that in a K108, or clinicians, it's not something that they should be doing, or they're going to get in trouble, especially if they ever get audited. Documentation, one quick item is really just the ABN, which is the advanced beneficiary notice itself. With the advanced beneficiary notice, it's something that in essence is letting them know up front, hey, yes, I want this extra item. I know it's not going to be covered, whatever it happens to be. And that's really for upgrades. Going from one code to the next code, they're willing to pay the difference. They'll just, that's going to be on them. We really don't do it in the upcharge area because the upcharges are within a code. And that's when we get into the whole assignment issue. So ABNs are really from going from one code to another, but it's not a bad idea to use for the others. Just again, giving patients some notice and letting them know what's going on. Now, this is the part where I was trying to get to more quickly in regards to what can we do when it comes to denials. So first we have to ask ourselves, what type of denial do we have? So who actually denied the order? I'll have clinicians who will say to me, Claudia, this was denied. after we do a little digging, it never actually went to the insurer. It got denied internally within the provider's internal funding staff or intake staff or whomever it happens to be. They do their review appropriately like they should. And they'll deny it before they send it to the insurer. So a couple things. One, in a lot of cases, they're going to be right. But two, we're all human. Somebody can make a mistake. You can have a newer person. They could have missed a policy update, whatever it happens to be. But we need to ask the questions. As clinicians, I would always ask, was this denied, from your team internally, or better yet, can I see a copy of the denial? Clinicians, for me, the only way you're going to be able to answer to certain things is if you see the actual denial, because it might already be in your documentation. So ask for it. It's going to hopefully make everybody's job easier and faster versus you trying to answer to something you don't know what you're actually answering to. So if it's denied from the insurer, they're going to have a denial, and it should tell them what the denial's for in most cases, and some more detailed than others, but they should have something. If it's their internal staff, twofold. What's their policy? Why are they denying it specifically? So ask the questions. I know your time's limited, but again, this is the only way we're going to break these cycles. If it's the insurer, what level of denial is it? Is it, is it something that the provider can quickly just point to your documentation showing, hey, look, the therapist wrote this information right here? Or is it something that, something I got involved with about 2 weeks ago where the therapist was involved, the end user was involved, the manufacturer was involved, I was involved. We were all in there speaking on behalf of that end user and that denied claim. There might, some of the insurers, not so much Medicare, that one they'll do a tiny bit, but all your other insurers will do peer-to-peers. And it could be therapist and or it could be the physician, depending on the situation. But they'll do a peer-to-peer, and sometimes that's easier because as a clinician, you can talk through what that need is. They'll normally do that just over a phone call. So again, it's understanding, knowing what it is, what can you do? The more they see of a product and the more they approve of a product, the easier it is to either possibly either get a policy, or two, that themselves, they as an insurance company might, put out some just internal memos, not anything published out, but just educating their own staff of this is what we've learned. This is why somebody might need a product. So the more we provide them with information, the better it's going to be. The more we allow them to just say no and not fight for it, the easier for them is to continue to say no. And I don't mean that, hey, let's fight even the wrong denial or the right denials. If they properly denied it, then we let it go, because then they see also that we're not just going to argue for things that shouldn't be. So we have to pick our battles and pick them appropriately, if that makes sense. So on this case study, so to speak, is this was the call that I did about 2 weeks ago. We'll say the end user, his name was Max. He was 20, or he is a 26-year-old CP quad, independent, driving his power wheelchair for years. Through the years, as he's aged, he's had more spasms, he's had more issues. He's now, within the notes, it clearly wrote from both the doctor and the therapist that he's apprehensive. He's scared to drive now outside of his home. He won't go outside of his home because he's afraid, unless he's actually, somebody's actually pushing him now. He's much more limited. He's no longer as independent as he used to be. Thankfully, he is also extremely well-spoken. I think that evening at home, I said, he was the most eloquent person I heard to speak his case at that point in time, but it had been denied by his state Medicaid. Ironically, that Medicaid program, their vision includes the words innovation and independence. This was something that they said, some of their words were, or some of their denial reasons stated, well, if they don't really go outside, why can't they just have a caregiver with them the whole time? The insurer obviously didn't read the fact that the reason why they haven't gone outside is because they're now scared, because they're not driving as well as they used to. They also said, in essence, can't you control the dog inside the house so that way they don't, accidentally hit the dog? So on that one, I was sitting there saying, okay, so great. Now they can't have a pet because they're, been afraid of driving just recently. Now they're supposed to have a caregiver with them 24/7. Number one, who's going to fund that? Number two, who wants that? Especially when we have somebody that has the ability to be independent. We just have to give them the tools to be independent. They tried to use that, there's no studies with this product. There was plenty of studies. There was testing. There was all of that. This happened to be actually for a Lucy product. There was the best written doctor's note that I have ever seen in regards to details, why they needed the product, why they could not, if they did not have the product, why they'd have to end up really being just cared for by a caregiver 24/7. So all of this was there. The hard part was we got to the call. Well, the first call, the person from the insurance company didn't show up. So a couple of weeks later, we all got back on a call and they did show up. And this time they said, well, I'm on the call, but I can't make a decision. It's not my, I don't have the authority to change this decision. So number one, I'm wondering, why are we on this call? And number two, I'm going, all right, well, great. We know we're going to go to the next level, but we still spoke, our case, so to speak. To me, if you're ever in any of those providers, although you're great, let the clinicians do most of the speaking, because as providers, we're still looked at as the money people, so to speak. So let the clinicians do most of the talking. When there was a question about product, in one case, the manufacturer spoke up, and in another case, the ATP for the provider spoke up, and it worked out perfectly. But more importantly, the end user spoke up and specifically, stated all the things that had happened. Everybody went through the information that was provided, and that was good. He clearly stated, hey, I want to move on to the next step. So that's the part we're waiting for. But something to keep in mind with that is, one, everybody got involved. Sort of time went out the window because we wanted to make sure this end user was taken care of. The provider, the ATP on that front, their internal staff, everybody got involved on that one. So the more that we can speak up, again, even in this case, it's a new product. So hopefully this, state Medicaid program will get used to seeing it, understanding it more on the next call, learning about it more, getting them the information. So the more claims they see, the more, they can hopefully make the right decision. And I'm not even saying that they have to fund all of them. If it's justified, then yeah, they should fund it. But if it's not justified, then by all means, I'm the first one to say, look, you don't have the right documentation. You shouldn't be getting this approved. So those are things to look at on that front. So make sure, to me, this is the only way we're going to get that innovation side pushed forward. Because if we all sit back like we have for many years, it's not going to change. It's the infamous saying, if you keep doing the same thing, it's why should it change? It's just going to be the same thing. So we need to speak up. And that's what we have to look at on that front. Really quick here. Somebody was asking, I'm wondering if anyone has seen group 3 multi-power wheelchair denials and electronics from UHC. Many of our providers are having these issues with this. Peggy, I'm wondering if you know anything about it. I will touch on that for you in 2 seconds. Well, as soon as we get here done. And when you say we have to be louder, who within the insurance company is ultimately responsible for writing, changing codes, and the authority to do and implement those changes? Who specifically are we supposed to be loud to? So great question, Natalie, on that one. So a couple things. So PDAC, who is one of the Medicare contractors, they're responsible. They do all the coding, so to speak. They're sort of, I call them the grandparent of coding. And there's now twice a year that people are able to submit for new codes. That alone doesn't mean it's easy to do, number one. And also, as I tell everybody, getting a new code doesn't make it right. So there's sort of that coding arm, but they also are, trying to learn about product. The policy part is done by different people. I would say a lot of the commercial, if not most of the commercial payers, and even the Medicaids will use Medicare's policy as their foundation. I remember even walking into a big commercial payer asking for their policy, and they just gave me Medicare's policy. If you think about it, for insurers, it's easier for them. Somebody's done all the hard work. They have something they can rely on. Some of them will loosen up from there, especially Medicaids are supposed to be doing that since they should be looking outside at the community and sort of at the whole world of the end user, so to speak. But people will start with the Medicare policy. So this is the touchy part. In regards to policy, we have to be careful what we ask for, because sometimes the policy will be it's non-covered. So it's making sure we do it smart. For me, getting louder right now is the more that we push on the denials. So more with the medical review staff, the appeal staff, the administrative law judges, all the people that are doing the reviews of the claims, the more they hear that is the more that it's going to help to push. Also, your state senators, representatives, anything like that, the more the community gets involved. I was pleasantly surprised at a meeting that I happened to be involved with a couple months ago, and a state representative, you know, whenever we walk in, normally they have no clue what CRT is. They happened to just have a meeting recently regarding CRT, and they knew exactly what it was, and they were very involved and wanted to learn more. So getting them more involved is going to also be big, because they have much bigger voices in the places that we can't get to. But when it comes to being loud, to me with the denials, don't let them just go. Clinicians, if you're told by a provider, hey, we can't do that one because it's non-covered, find out if it's really non-covered, or again, what's the denial? Where did it come from? Internally, or is it from the actual insurer? Is it something that's just they've decided to make quote unquote non-covered as a provider because it's too much work, the margins aren't enough, whatever it happens to be? Nothing against the providers on that front, but it's something to look at. And by all means, I'm the first one to say providers obviously need to also, you know, they have a business, they need to make a living, so we need to protect them too. But I think we have to look at it on both sides. So it's making sure we speak up on that front. There is somebody who had just sent a chat in that says, Daniel, that he works for a nonprofit that provides assistance with coverage of some non-covered items. Those are things that to look at too. There's whether it's nonprofits like this, it's asking questions. There's a lot of community programs that have put things together. So there are other things out there. It's just getting not so much creative, it's just looking outside our box, really is what it comes down to as well. So seeing what we have on that front. And this is the what can you do? It's being involved. You know, it's the appeals with the denials, get on the calls, write new documentation. Clinicians, typically at ISS, I'm talking to clinicians who truly do all write their own documentation. But if for some reason you are one that is getting assistance from the ATP, however that may be, we'll just leave it at that. One, I would ask for you to get more involved with your documentation. I've heard insurers say, you know, why does this documentation all look the same? Well, when one person's writing all the documentation, it tends to look the same. So sometimes we create our own headaches, and that's the part we have to step away from. We have to write that documentation for individuals and make sure it's individualized to their order, to their situation. And also don't tell insurers what the product does necessarily. For something brand new, something like a Lucy or something out there that's new, then you need to, you know, describe it somewhat, but then attach the description of that product to the needs of the patient. The insurers, I know people say they're not very smart. Yes and no, but they're not complete idiots either. So they do know what a tilt is. They do know what a power recline is. They do know what these things are. So don't tell them what it is. Tell them why the patient needs it. So that's a big one. If you're writing, or when you're writing, not if, when you're writing your own documentation, ask yourselves, have I said, you know, why is it that this specific person needs this device? And it can't be just that they need this for a power tilt. They aren't able to complete an independent weight shift. Well, go further. Why can't they? What's the problem? What's tied to them as to why they can't do it? So just, you know, add more information, because we're asking them to pay for a lot of money, and that's what we have to look at. Do not just throw the documentation in for reviewing. So this one's, you know, questioning and researching. This to me comes in more with providers. when something's denied, a lot of times I'll find internal staff will just resend the same documentation they already sent. They think, well, they never read it. Well, number one, we don't know. So if they're looking at the denial, if anything, if they're going to resend it, then they have to point them to the information. You know, the therapist on page 3, paragraph 2 wrote this in answer to your question. You know, that answers your question. So, you know, just continually saying, here it is, here it is. Obviously, something's not working. So we need to look at it differently. Clinicians or providers can ask for a peer-to-peer review for a lot of insurers, not all. And that would be for the clinician, though, to speak to them. Not their clinicians on their team, but actually the patient's clinician. Involving the state representatives, you know, take the time to educate them. Don't sell them. Use that as a time to truly educate. That's going to come back to you, should come back to you, but don't try to sell them, because if you try to sell them, and what I mean by that is, you know, hey, look at how wonderful this product is, and mine's better than, you know, manufacturer A's versus manufacturer C's or whatever it happens to be. So that's what I mean by selling. It's not about selling just your product. It's looking at the whole thing. And don't just give in, not to the providers, not to the insurers. We just have to know what battles we're going to actually want to fight when it comes to all of that. So that's something that we really need to look at. With that said, I may have actually done my timing. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes left, and I wanted to see, there was a couple questions in here. I'm going to get to UHC in a moment, but do you have any recommendations for manufacturers, designers, innovators to successfully get coding for new product designs, specifically seat support products that do not fit current policy language? That's like a whole other presentation. And some of that, as much as I hate to say this term, but it depends as to what it is. So trying to get new policy, not easy. They're used to Medicare. CMS used to do one HCPCS application meeting a year. Now they have 2. So there's different avenues there. But the biggest thing for this one during this call right now, for the couple minutes we have, is I would say to everybody, just because there is a code doesn't mean it'll be covered. So whenever you're going down that path, we really have to look at the whole thing, codes and policy themselves. Because a lot of times they'll say, hey, here's a code. And then the next thing we know is that code's non-covered. Have you seen state Medicaid using PDAC codes request inappropriately in order to delay approvals? I don't know. And Catherine, you can unmute yourself. If Adrian can let you unmute yourself to see if I understand that correctly.
Yeah, this is Catherine. Thanks, Claudia.
Yeah.
So here in Oregon, we're getting in our state Medicaids, they're sending almost kind of as a tactic for delaying authorization. They'll send products or request that products be sent to PDAC for coding that are already coded. And it's just a referral, you know, obviously the manufacturers, we have that information already, but it's kind of a delay processing where, you know, PDAC isn't, my understanding is that PDAC is not intended to be, and they're not staffed to manage multiple requests for things that are already established. I'm just wondering if you've seen.
Yeah, a couple of things. Catherine, do you work for the clinician manufacturer provider?
I work currently for manufacturer, but I'm a PT, ATP, SMS.
Okay, awesome. So a couple of things on that one, and we can always connect offline because there's some work I do on that front. I mean, yeah, there's a story I know behind that. There could be something there that might be a misunderstanding, I guess is the best way I can say that. So if you want to connect the website's there, my email's claudia@orionreimbursement.net, or on the website, you can just click info and send me your information and we can connect afterwards, because I've actually spoken with the PDAC about that, and then with some of the providers and others, and what we've learned, it looks like some things may be going in that shouldn't be going in. So there's more to that conversation.
Okay, I really appreciate it.
That we won't bore everybody with.
Okay.
Yeah, I do know a little bit more on that one. And then Kara, I think you've got a message out there for one of the other people chatting to get in touch with you. And we'll talk about UHC in a second here. We talked about that. Can we recommend some documentation resources, references to my fellow staff clinicians who are new to the seating world to help improve their documentation? Oh, I know I saw Rich on here earlier. One, and Dawn might be able to speak. NCART may have some things available to you. There's some things my team and I can possibly help you with. That would be if, and then others might be able to send you information, but and then Natalie, is there any kind of centralized forum, if you will, where we can become aware of matters related to this subject to be involved in that we may otherwise not have heard of to get involved? Off the top, no, it may be something we look at. It may be something that NCART has that I'm not aware of. It may be something that with Mark and Rich and team at University of Pittsburgh that we might be able to look at as well. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, from the University of Pittsburgh team, but I think we're keeping a copy of this chat, or we should be able to keep a copy of this chat so then we can try to think through some things after the symposium and see what might be able to happen on that front. And then somebody has also asked, I've seen some providers adding E1002 to the E1161. I've also seen them be approved by ADMC. So just a heads up, E1002 is the Tilton space code. It does not state manual or power. It's just a, I'm sorry, it doesn't say it has to be on a manual or powered wheelchair. It just says it's a powered tilt that can be added to a wheelchair. So it is allowed. This is where I say heads up, it's for the right situations and they are limited. So it can be done. It has always been able to be done. It's just more common now based on some products that are out there. So just make sure if it's documented. The ones I've seen have been for some patients that may not be cognitive enough to drive safely in a power wheelchair, but they have the ability to at least tilt themselves to make sure they're doing some weight shifts. So that's a situation where I've seen it. So it's a really limited window from what I've seen, but it can be done on that front. And there's a couple more questions. I know we're running out of time, so I'm gonna, with the team, Alex, do you want me to answer those last ones? Do you wanna?
I was just going to say, thank you so much for all of the effort you've put in and the great presentation. I would say to just follow up with Claudia. If you can maybe put your email in the chat, Claudia, if anyone has any follow-up questions, and I will put in the CEU code for this session. You're more than welcome to continue answering questions for the last 2 minutes we have here, but I will post the CEU code here in the chat and kind of let you, and as you please here. I don't know, we might get, I guess the technician on the session, will we get booted out at 11:15?
No, you'll get booted when I close the room, so
Okay, so
it's okay.
I'll answer a couple more questions.
Okay.
So everybody,
Yeah, you're good.
Alex is going to put the code into the chat. And then also Don Clayback with NCART added the access to crt.org website in there and his email address as well. They have a lot of great resources and tools. And then obviously I put my email in there, but let me answer a couple of these real quick. Let me go back to this. Can you speak to Permobil using the F5 Corpus VS being made available as a Group 3 base? I recently received it now as it is not being medically necessary inside the home. That I know so if the F5 with the standing, what happens with that is that chair got coded as a Group 4 with a standing base. The way their order form is set, it actually, you'll see the Group 3, but then it'll say once it's converted to the standing wheelchair base, in essence, that base code becomes a Group 4, which then becomes denied. So that's sort of the short part of a long story. Susan, you're welcome to reach out on that front, but that's what has happened there is, when it was developed, the base itself without the standing is officially coded as a Group 3, but once you put the standing on there, it becomes a Group 4 base, and the Group 4 base itself is considered non-covered. So that's the hiccup on that one. Can you do up charges? The next question was, can you do up charges to clients with Medicaid who have restrictions on out-of-pocket costs? John, on that one, it depends. In some cases, you just have to really look at the Medicaid policy for that state and that specific person's policy, so to speak, or coverage. In some few cases, we have seen where you can collect on them, but you would just have to look at those individually. I think there's two more questions in here. Susan, especially since the pandemic, it seems like vendor and probably clinicians don't have the bandwidth to go above and beyond and almost having a difficulty time with routine work. And they will say they don't have the support of the company. That one's a tough one, but in the same breath, because a lot of the denials being able to be fought on the phone, like the one we just did, those are all just done virtually on a call. Hopefully, if they normally won't take more than 30 minutes. I know it's a lot of time and a lot of people who don't have time already in their schedules, but back to it's the one we have to try to find to get a change. Or if not, like I said, the more denials are accepted, so to speak, there's no reason why any insurer should change the way they're doing things, because it's going, well, everybody's okay with it because they said it's okay. And unfortunately, the people who end up losing are the patients, not only on those products themselves, but again, future innovation. So that's the part we have to look at. Kara, same thing. Thank you. The CTF website does have great resources. I blanked on that one, so my apologies there. And I think the one thing, so UHC, thank you everybody for the comments on the presentation. The UHC deal, I've stepped away from it for a little while. I was tired of it. It's still going on. The UHC deal, that one to me is clinicians, fellow clinicians. I'm not a clinician, but you amongst yourselves. UHC has a consultant on staff. Their belief is very much so that through drive controls, they have a whole belief in regards to how all the multiple power options and through drive controls and everything ties together, where Medicare and the other insurers actually look at it differently. And that's the headache we've run into. I don't know the best way. To me, I talked to providers on saying, we need to stop, but UHC is obviously a big payer. So everybody, in my opinion, hasn't probably fought as loudly as they should have on the provider side, which means no longer providing service, so to speak, or halting service or doing something on that side. Because again, as long as their members are taken care of, there's no reason to change it. So we need some of the bigger companies, so to speak, to talk about that and get there. But it really, to me, is an issue of education. I've had a conversation with the PDAC medical director, with the Medicare medical directors. They all understand it appropriately. UHC has just decided to interpret the policy differently. And it all, in my opinion, has to do with commas and periods, so to speak. And that's what's happened with UHC. So again, it's a longer conversation we can get into. And that's something, we'll have to look at on that front. And I can go into a whole different array of that as well. But, again, my contact information is there. If there's anything anybody else needs, I'm going to let you guys go because I know you'll have other sessions and I'm already 5 minutes over. But thank you to everybody. It was great to see at least names, and hopefully we'll actually see each other soon in person. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Claudia. I really appreciate it.